Hello, let's talk about the speech communication process. All right, I have a model here. I hope you can see it. And we're going to spend a little bit of time on this slide. First thing I'd like to point out is this rhetorical situation that's plastered across the top, and that is really the entire background. Some books will call this the context. Some will call it just the situation. I prefer the name rhetorical situation. Whatever it's called, it's the same thing. What it means is that all communication happens within a context or within a environment. And that simply means that a particular person is compelled to say particular things in a particular time and place, moment in history, because of everything that's happening right there. So there's one fleeting moment when everything that's happening in the political environment, in the physical environment, in the the people who are there, who is speaking, to whom are they speaking, why are they saying these things, all have particular meaning. This rhetorical situation will never happen exactly the same way again, and it can't be recreated, it can never be repeated, and you can never redo it. You can never undo it. It is a fleeting moment. So, for example, let's say Martin Luther King Jr. giving the I Have a Dream speech in the 1960s in front of the Lincoln Memorial. I could give that speech, I could say those words right now, but it wouldn't be the same because I'm not Martin Luther King Jr. I'm not standing in front of the Lincoln Memorial. It's not the 1960s. And if I did it right now, I could say the same words, but it would not have the same context. We would be looking at it from a historical perspective, and it would not have the same meaning. The context would be completely different. So this is what I mean by the rhetorical situation. You have to take into consideration when understanding any communication, who is speaking, to whom are they speaking, why are they saying these things, and um, what's going on in the political environment, in the physical environment, what gives special meaning, what is compelling this person to have this particular discussion at this time. So all of that will enrich or compel the speaker to say these things. And that will not be there in the future. And it's a one-time event. You miss it, you miss the opportunity, and you can't really repeat it. So that is the rhetorical situation. It's important to understand that fleeting nature of communication. You can miss the opportunity to have that moment, and you can never repeat it. You can never, anybody ever say anything that you regret immediately as soon as you've said it. And you realize that you shouldn't have said it and you wish you hadn't said it. You can't go back and unsay it. Maybe you can apologize, but you can never undo that. So it's the same thing here. If you miss the opportunity, you miss the opportunity and you can't 10 minutes later, it's no longer going to have the same effect. You can't say it now because the conversation has moved on. So rhetorical situation, important concept. Now, easy enough to understand. The sender and a receiver. So in public speaking, Usually there is a speaker and multiple people who are receivers of that information. And so that's what is shown here. So the speaker is the one with an agenda. The speaker is the one who has something up here and has an agenda that they want it to be understood over here. So we hold the speaker accountable. The speaker is the one person who has the responsibility and the challenge to make sure that whatever it is that's inside their mind is understood over here. And it's a huge responsibility. So if one person has to be held accountable, it is the speaker. They're the ones who have the agenda. So you see this word filter. So I have something in my mind. Unfortunately, I can't just telepathically beam it over here. We have, I'm not sure that would be a good idea, but if I could do that and have it fully understood on the other end, that would be perfect communication. But we don't have a perfect system here. It's imperfect. So I am the sender in this model right now in what I'm trying to communicate to you as a teacher. I have something up here in my mind. I want to convey that to you and have you understand it close to the way I understand it. So I'm going to have to take what's in my mind and encode it into a message. And you see this word filter. Filter means that I'm going to take what's in my mind and I'm going to have to use symbols, in this case, spoken English language, to try to convey it. I'm going to use some artwork too, and I'm going to try to convey that to you. And the way I do that, the words I choose, the symbols, the metaphors, the references I make are going to be affected by my filter. My filter includes everything that has happened to me and influenced who I have become. I was born in 1960, which is probably not the year you were born in. I was raised in a little town called Flatwoods, Kentucky. So my upbringing is probably a lot different from yours. I was taught and influenced by my community, my parents, my church, and that's probably a lot different experience than you have had. So my filter has been different. I've been shaped, I've been taught, and I probably have different experiences in life than you have. And all of that's going to affect the way I use words, what happens in my mind, the kind of references that I use, all of that is going to affect how I encode the message that I'm going to form. But I'm going to do my best. I'm going to form that message, which is going to be affected how I do that by my filter. And I'm going to form that message into spoken English words. And that is going to travel through a channel. So right now, this channel is coming to you through sound waves and light rays because you can see an image and you can hear my voice, and that is traveling through the air, being picked up by a microphone, that is being translated through cyberspace. It is coming out on the other end through some kind of speaker or headset on your end, and it's coming into your ears and into your eyes, and that is the channel. And you're going to interpret that once it is received by you. So that is the channel. And then you see that you're going to, as you receive it, you are going to decode that message, which is interpret it. And that is going to be affected the way you decode the message, the way you understand those words and images, the message that I sent is going to be affected by your filter, which is different from my filter. Everyone has a filter. And for you, that is going to be all the sum impact of everyone who's influenced you and everything you've experienced that's going to affect how you understand words, what they mean to you, uh, everything that you've been taught by the people who influenced you, who brought you up, the community that influenced you, all the people in your life that have made you who you are today, and all the things you've experienced are going to affect how what that means to you. Notice this big yellow lightning bolt in the middle. Um, some books, I think maybe your book actually calls this noise, whether we call it noise or interference. Um, Different scholars call it different things. It's the same concept. Regardless, interference noise is basically anything that tends to be a barrier to perfect transmission of this message through the channel to you. And typically there are four different kinds of interference, and we'll talk about those. The first thing that comes to mind might be physical interference. So this would be static on the line or background noise. If there was somebody crying, a baby crying, or noisy people in the hall, or a dog barking, that would be physical interference or physical noise. The other would be physiological. That would be the second one. Physiological would be something to do with my body or your body. I have a little scratchy throat right now and I'm having to cough every once in a while. That would be an example of physiological noise. It could be, you know, your a problem with your headset or your speaker or something to do with the internet bandwidth, and that could be interfering technology. Those would be, if it has to do with my body or your body, um, maybe, um, maybe your hearing aid, yeah, battery just died or something like that. Anything like that would be physiological. If it has to do with your body or my body, then that would be physiological. Psychological is the third kind. Psychological would be bias or closed-mindedness. If I'm saying something and you have a strongly held opinion that's very different, if I'm talking to you about a political candidate and you just are not going to hear what I have to say about that particular political candidate, you've already made up your mind, then that would be a psychological interference. Or you don't like me personally, you're not going to receive the message because you have a personal bias against me as the person who's delivering the message, or against the message itself, or the company I represent. Then that would be psychological interference. And then the last is called semantic interference or noise, and that would be, we have assumed that because I am using spoken English language as my shared set of symbols, that we have the same set of shared symbols and that we understand it the same way, but maybe that's not perfect. And maybe we actually have different meanings for the same words. And that happens from time to time. I spend a little bit of time in England, and yes, they speak English. We speak English, although we don't speak it the same way they speak it. So I stopped and asked directions, how to get to a certain place. And um, the man that I asked said, carry on to the next roundabout and turn straight up. And I scratched my head because at that time uh, I didn't understand what he said. I didn't know what a roundabout was, and I didn't know what turning up straight up meant. And carry on, I kind of assumed, but I didn't know 100%. Carry on, I thought that probably meant I was headed in the right direction. Um, of course, since learned what a roundabout is. They're all over the place now in Kernersville, where I live, but at that time in the 1980s, I didn't know what that was. So you can have somebody, you can speak the same language and have different meanings, connotative meanings, even. A word that might have an emotional charge for you may not have the same emotional charge for me. So, um, that would be semantic interference if I used a word and had a different meaning for it than you had. That would be semantic interference. So those are the four types. And just to jump ahead, this is a quick look at those four words before we move on. So physical interference, loud sounds, could be anything in the physical environment, even something distracting like temperature or something. Physiological, something related to the body. If I had laryngitis or somebody had a hearing problem or vision problem. Psychological, a closed-mindedness or something um, about the um, the psychology of the situation, and semantic. Those are the four different kinds of interference or noise, depending on whose book or scholarship you look at. Back to the model. So now we've made it through the interference, and we have already talked about how this message gets decoded going through the filter of each individual audience member. And you see, of course, there, because we're talking about public speaking, there are many different members in this audience. So each one has its own filter. So there are multiple people. And of course, the audience is diverse. It is everybody, every individual in this audience is different from the next. However, they have something in common also, because otherwise they wouldn't be gathered in the same place at the same time. They have something in common. As a class, all of the students in this class have something in common. Otherwise, you wouldn't be taking this class at Forsyth Tech. You have something in common. You're all trying to achieve some kind of credential that requires this class, or you're taking it for the pure pleasure of taking public speaking. But you're all here at this institution taking this class online. So you have something in common as well, but you're very different students as well. Now, I'm also showing secondary receivers because there always are people who get pieces or partial information, not because they're watching the whole video here in context, but maybe they're getting pieces of it secondhand. Maybe someone asks you, "How is your class?" And maybe you give them even a one-word answer like fine or good or something partial answer, or maybe they walk through the room while you're listening to this tape and they hear a few sentences of this recording. So they get pieces of it. So that would be a group of secondary receivers. Um, in live communication, maybe there would be bystanders or eavesdroppers or somebody who walks through the room where the speech is happening and they, or a server, if it's a dinner speech, who hears parts of the speech, who wasn't an intended audience member, but hears parts of it, or a news broadcast. Um, you hear a lot of times political people saying that was taken out of context. That means they their words were used in such a way that it doesn't reflect the intent or the way they intended it to be taken if you had listened to the entirety of what they said. So here we go. Can individual members of an audience communicate with each other in real time? Absolutely. If you've ever been to the sixth grade band concert, as I have, you may have heard some music that wasn't really all that wonderful, and yet you may have ended up giving a standing ovation at the end, not because you really thought the music was that great, but because you felt peer pressured into it because everyone else beside you, behind you, in front of you ended up standing, and at some point you felt like you also must stand. That was peer to peer or audience member to audience member communication, probably nonverbal. Simply the fact that everyone else was standing made you feel like you should also stand. So there is communication between members of an audience, could be verbal, could be nonverbal, and there is oftentimes communication with secondary receivers as well. So now we've made it halfway through, and the truth of the matter is there is also this bottom loop, and sort of the same thing happens here. There is a feedback loop. There's not usually a lot of dialogue direct back and forth in public speaking the way there would be in interpersonal communication, which is the other class we offer here. That would be COM 120, which would be up close and personal dialogue between friends, not public speaking, not for distance, but casual conversation. That would be more dialogue back and forth between one-on-one or one to a few people in the context of a relationship. Public speaking, what we're studying, is more monologue, more for distance, more formal. Not much of a relationship is presumed here, so it's a little different. But there is a feedback loop. You probably have not had a lot of back and forth here. That's probably been one person doing mostly talking and an audience mostly listening, and yet there will be some feedback, either questions and answers or nonverbal feedback that could happen if it's live. Um, the speaker could observe that if it's in real time. In a situation like this, there could be feedback that comes afterward or asynchronously, but there could be feedback and most likely would be feedback, and that has to pass through the same kinds of interference that could happen, and it also is subject to the filters on both ends, and the channel has to pass through the same channel or a different channel. It could be email, whatever. All right. So we've talked about the different kinds of interference. We've talked about filters. These are things that I've added, may or may not be in your book. Secondary receivers. We've talked about audience to audience communication. And we've talked about how the audience is not homogeneous, or all members of the audience are not the same. That's what that means. There is diversity in the audience, and yet there is something that all members of the audience do have in common. And that's the challenge for the public speaker, is to find that and capitalize on what it is that they all do have in common. Let's talk a little bit more. I touched on it already. The difference between public speaking and interpersonal communication. Things that are similar is all communication is surprisingly visual. As we learn more and more, we are finding that there is more and more of communication actually happens outside of the words. So not all of that is nonverbal or visual. Some of it is in the way we say what we say, the way we emphasize certain words. Um, but more and more, we're seeing that there is a strong visual component to the communication. In both cases, we're aiming to improve understanding and relationship. Context matters. That whole very first point that I made about the rhetorical situation means that you have to consider the context. Communication is not repeatable, it's irreversible, and in both cases, we're going to rely on shared symbols, and communication is not perfect. One myth is that we can solve every problem if we just communicate enough. And I will tell you that in my experience, that is a myth. There are situations where the more you communicate, the more you realize we're so far apart that we can communicate. The more we communicate, the more we're going to realize that we can't solve this problem. So communication cannot solve every problem, although it can increase understanding. It cannot solve every problem on its own. Differences. Public speaking is different from interpersonal because it specifically is speaking for distance. If you've ever been to a live performance, a play, for example, and you've ever seen the makeup of the people in that play, say at intermission or afterwards, you will see that that makeup, if you see it up close and personal, you will realize that it was not meant to be seen up close. It was meant to be seen from a distance. And people who are acting on stage actually have to speak differently, and their gestures are different than actors and actresses who are on the big screen. Because on the big screen, the camera can zoom in for the tight shot, and the subtlety of their facial expressions can communicate much. However, on stage, movements and gestures are usually exaggerated, voices have to project to row 50, and it's a different kind of thing. So the same is true in communication. Public speaking is speaking for distance. It's more monologue. It is public. There's no secret that you're going to tell in a public speech. It is public, and you're projecting your voice, and it is formal. You're not going to have an intimate relationship in most cases with an audience when you're standing at a podium in front of an audience. That is not um, a close group of friends. That is not private. Okay. Interpersonal communication, you're going to be closer, physically closer. So you're not going to be projecting your voice and speaking for distance. Um, you are going to be speaking more intimately. You probably are going to have a more personal relationship with these people, and it's going to be more dialogue, probably. It's not going to be monologue. It's not going to be one person doing all the talking. You're going to speak for a little while, then you're going to hand over the role of speaker to one of the other people or the other person. And there's a whole art of giving cues to that other person when you are or are not ready to hand over that role of speaker. It's going to be more casual, and it could include secrets or things that are not meant for public consumption, because these are people with whom you have a relationship. Okay. And it could also include certain inside jokes or shortcuts or code switching. Code switching is a term we use when we intentionally use um, language in a way that excludes other people, or inside jokes or the like, or language that we know, maybe it's a second language or a second dialect that we know is shared between members of a group and not others. Okay? There are certain responsibilities that speakers have. We're back to public speaking now. Ethics, we have a responsibility to be ethical, have ethical motives when we speak. Please use the skills you learn in this class to um, have noble goals, noble objectives, not to deceive, but to enlighten and teach the truth, to have ethical objectives, respect your audience, don't plagiarize, present your own original thoughts or identify the sources. Stay within First Amendment boundaries, and we have a whole presentation on that. But obviously, um, you're not going to commit any kind of libel or slander or hate, harm people with your words. Enrich the listener's life. That means that you have an obligation, if you have the privilege of having somebody's attention in this world of information overload, deliver the goods. If you're speaking to inform, that means have information that is new and useful. Um, don't waste anyone's time with a speech that doesn't provide anything new, that simply repeats information that your audience already knows. If you're speaking to entertain, then make us laugh. If you're speaking to persuade, then move the needle, make us at least go, never thought of that. Um, if you're speaking to inspire, then lift us up a little bit. Um, take every speech seriously. That just means that, the nature of public speaking is that it's scheduled. It's it's designated for a specific time. You probably have to agree months in advance that you're going to speak at a specific time and place. And sure enough, you're gambling that you're going to feel motivated at that particular moment to do it. But let me tell you, the nature of public speaking is whether you feel like it or not, um, you have an obligation to do your best at that moment. Maybe you're not at 100%. Maybe you don't feel your best, but take every speech seriously and do your best. And if that means pretending to feel better and more excited than you really are at that moment, then you should do that, because you do have an obligation to do your best with every speech that you give. All right. And I believe that finishes off this particular lecture. Let me know if you have any questions about this. And this is a combination of the best of all the textbooks that I have taught from and all the researchers and scholars that I have borrowed from. Your books actually has um, a less complicated version of this and a few other models that I think are probably not sufficient to cover the process for you to look at. But this one is, I think, the best and the deepest understanding that you could have from it all. And this is what I recommend that you use for your own personal edification.